Born 7 years before the Battle of Yavin, Kyp Durron was a powerful Jedi Master who stood as one of the most polarizing individuals in galactic history. Discovered to be Force-sensitive by Han Solo after being liberated from enslavement on the spice mines of Kessel, Kyp joined Luke Skywalker's Jedi Academy, where his abnormal strength in the Force and tenacity enabled him to surpass the achievements of the other students in a mere week. Despite his great strength, Durron's deep-seated anger against his former captures was easily exploited by the spirit of Exar Kun, which culminated in the young knight setting off a superweapon known as the Sun Crusher and obliterating the entire Cardia system. Though able to eventually free himself from the entity's influence, Kyp was greatly affected by his experiences as a Dark Jedi, his desire to repent for his actions manifesting itself in a high-profile campaign across the Outer Rim territories as part of a newly formed philosophy of direct action against anyone whom he perceived as evil. When the extragalactic Yuuzhan Vong attacked the galaxy in 25 ABY, Durron was one of the first masters to meet the threat, losing his apprentice Miko Regalia and many other fellow Jedi in the opening salvos of the war. His policy of aggressive action enhanced in the face of this new menace. Durron began leading like-minded Jedi to war against the wishes of Master Skywalker. Though initially successful, further losses motivated Kyp to reconcile with the Grand Master and join him and the newly formed Galactic Alliance's reacquisition of Coruscant, ending the war. Following this victory, Kyp would be granted a seat on the Jedi High Council, serving as one of the body's leading and outspoken members. Although peace would hold relatively well for nearly a decade, events took a dire turn when intersystem conflicts on Corellia erupted in a second galactic civil war in 40 ABY. Despite his past differences with Luke Skywalker, Kyp stood firm when the Order was declared an enemy of the state when Jaina Solo's twin brother Jacen Solo took over the government and attempted to impose Sith rule upon the galaxy as Darth Plagueis. Following Plagueis' defeat, the galaxy entered into another period of reformation under the direction of Chief of State Natasi Dalia, one of Durron's former Imperial enemies. Dalia's policies included attempts to curb the autonomy of the Jedi Order, which Kyp Durron weathered along with his peers and was later instrumental in helping the Solos expose the former Imperial's implication in the Force psychosis outbreak. Born over 100 years before the Battle of Yavin, Darth Plagueis the Wise was a long-lived Dark Lord of the Sith who also stood as one of the most powerful and influential individuals in galactic history. Raised on the colony world of Megiddo by the Mune IBC director Kar Damask and his codicil wife, neither father or son realized that this union had been arranged by the Dark Lord of the Sith, Darth Tenebris, in order to produce a child abnormally strong in the Force. When the day finally came, Lord Tenebris claimed his apprentice. Over the following decades, Darth Plagueis learned the ways of the Sith, and in their public personas as the Bith engineer Rugis Nome and Hugo Damask II, the two worked tirelessly to undermine the Republic by secretly funding like-minded organizations and facilitating anarchy whenever and wherever possible. Where the Sith once wore armor, we now wear cloaks. But the Force works through us all the more powerfully in our invisibility. For the present, the more covert we remain, the more influence we can have. Our revenge will be achieved not through subjugation, but by contagion. This continued up until 67 BBY, when Plagueis betrayed and murdered Tenebris, claiming the mantle of Dark Lord for himself. His defeat of Darth Venemus, an alternate Sith trained by Tenebris, cemented his position, and Plagueis commenced his search for his own apprentice. He soon set his sights on Palpatine, the confused young heir to one of the noble houses of Naboo. Manipulating the young man into murdering his own family, Plagueis took him under his wing, dubbing him Darth Sidious. The Dark Lord spent the next 30 years training Sidious in the Sith arts, while instigating his rise in the Republic's political landscape as Senator Palpatine. though they suffered their fair share of setbacks, the most disastrous of which being an assassination attempt perpetrated by the Grand Protectorate that left Plagueis horrendously injured. The two were ultimately successful in securing Senator Palpatine's ascension to the office of Supreme Chancellor of the Republic. Darth Plagueis planned to be appointed co-chancellor of the Republic so that he might advise Sidious from the dark and devote himself freely to his study of the Force. The apprentice had other plans. Sidious, having rejected his master's veiled notion of an equal partnership and convinced the Sith Lord had outlived his usefulness, murdered him in his sleep. Darth Sidious would later recount the tale as the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise, an old Sith legend to sway Anakin Skywalker to the dark side of the Force. Kyp Durron was a human male, and aside from his Force sensitivity, was a rather typical specimen. As noted by the Essential Guide to Alien Species, humans were a highly evolved race possessed of greatly evolved minds and advanced hardiness and adaptability to sudden environmental alterations. At 51 years of age, Durron stood at 1.77 meters tall and has been described as having a powerful yet slender athletic build, no doubt the result of the sustaining power of the light side of the Force. Distinguished for his above-average Jedi reflexes, Kyp was highly acrobatic and has demonstrated his talents with Force speed on multiple occasions. He has blitzed stormtroopers, weaved after images, and briefly outran a Leviathan as a teenager, and was able to keep pace with council-level adepts like Jaina Solo and Luke Skywalker as an adult. Moving into Force-enhanced strength, Kyp had no trouble deflecting fire from a Class 720 freighter, nor was he all that troubled to enter into a tug-of-war with a Yuuzhan Vong Slayer. Though I would be remiss if I didn't mention that said Slayer was poisoned at the time. As mentioned previously, humans were renowned for their physical resiliency, and Durron was no exception. During a mission to Korbos, he withstood multiple hits from a young dark-side Leviathan and continued to fight on despite the beast's incredible strength. Several years later, he tanked a blast of Force lightning hurled at him by Jaina and was able to remain focused enough to dispel it. An impressive feat given Tutuminus' level of complexity as a power. Darth Plagueis was a male Mune, and therefore possessed a physique that was similar in makeup, but radically different in function to that of Kyp Durron. Native to the mineral-rich world of Munilist, Munes were a long-lived species of humanoids distinguished by their pale skin, gangly heights, 3 hearts, and mathematical intelligence. Though Munes were not typically renowned for their physical prowess compared to other species, Plagueis' use of Force augmentation made him an absolute monster. Though well over a century in age, Darth Plagueis' spindly body provided exceptional agility, and his use of Force-enhanced speed was nothing less than incredible. He has all but outran Rainfall on Naboo, fought at speeds almost beyond 114D's processing capability, which by the way includes calculating blaster bolt trajectories, and has even been compared directly to a bolt of lightning in regards to his movement. While I vehemently disagree with the notion that Plagueis' speed should be scaled to that of Revenge of the Sith Darth Sidious due to his noted inferiority in power, I won't deny the logic in scaling him to Phantom Menace Darth Sidious given their standing, which in turn does put him well within the Council range. Shifting over to strength and durability, Darth Plagueis' most notable displays of both came about during the attack on the Phobosy Lodge of the Candid Circle, wherein he literally punched through the armored torsos of several Maladian assassins, and despite also having lost copious amounts of blood with several of its hearts threatening to fail, was able to summon the strength to attack the assassins both physically and through the Force. In terms of overall health, Plagueis was also afflicted by the physical degradation brought about by deep immersion in the dark side of the Force, having literally described himself as an aged, pale-skinned, raspy-voiced, yellow-eyed monster. Charming. Despite this, his mastery of Midi-Chlorian manipulation did enable him to rejuvenate his body, reversing the effects of old age and largely countering this degradation. However, portions of Plagueis' face and neck were removed during the aforementioned attack on the Phobosy Lodge, leaving him permanently disfigured and forcing him to wear a transpirator mask over his mouth. While this breathing apparatus was not as invasive as the one worn by Darth Vader, it was still every bit as much of a weak point. If damaged or disabled, he suffocates, which evidently was how the Dark Lord was ultimately slain. Not much argument to be had with this one. While both combatants are similar in that they are bipedal humanoids with skin, Darth Plagueis is simply further along than Kyp Durron on the evolutionary scale, his longer limbs and extra hearts offering greater reach and superior cardiovascular regulation to that of his competition. As far as Force-enhanced strength is concerned, while I definitely favor Plagueis over Kyp in a general sense, I don't believe the gap is necessarily astronomical either. Sure, Darth Plagueis can rend Maladians limb from limb and tear the sabers from the grasps of low council-level adepts like it's nobody's business, but if Durron can grapple with Yuuzhan Vong's slayers and match the enhanced strength of Grandmaster Luke with little to no strain, there's no way the old Mune is going to be able to overwhelm him with any expediency. The same goes for their respective agility and reflexes. Again, Plagueis' Mune traits offer him natural advantages in both categories, but Kyp's exceptionality is such that neither advantage is elevated to a degree that would necessarily impact this fight. Shifting over to Force-enhanced speed, I'd say they're roughly on par. Both have showcased comparable feats of blast deflection and body blur weaving, and both have in some way been equated to lightning long before their respective primes. While it is true that Darth Plagueis should, in all likelihood, scale to Phantom Menace Darth Sidious in speed due to their standing, this is countered by Kyp Durron directly matching the swiftness of Luke Skywalker. That being said, durability is no contest. Kyp enduring bolts of Jaina's Force Lightning is highly impressive, yes, but it's not the same as Plagueis fighting through literally having half his face sliced off and 2 eurythmic hearts. Granted, this feat almost certainly owed itself to the Dark Lord's massive strength in the Force rather than any sort of biological characteristic, but it still speaks well towards the Mune's overall resiliency, and even lowballed surpasses anything the Jedi Master has ever endured. Addressing the limitations presented by Darth Plagueis' transpirator mask, I'm of two minds about the whole thing. On the one hand, yeah, the mask is a very real weakness that, if exploited, can turn the tide of the entire battle, and if a teenage Kyp is strong enough to pierce the hide of a Leviathan with nothing but a metal pole, I have little doubt that an adult version can rip apart a mere breathing apparatus if given the chance. On the other hand, well, it's not like the Dark Lord is just gonna stand there as the Jedi Master kills him. In a contest of pure physical might, the limitations of Plagueis' mask can only be taken advantage of if Kyp Durron successfully overpowers him first, and given the Sith's already noted physical superiority, I just don't see that happening 9 times out of 10. These odds may change when martial arts training and Force abilities are factored in, but as it stands, Plagueis' supremacy is as solid as it gets. Darth Plagueis gets the physical edge. Although he was a fearsome and rebellious master who spent much of his formative years on the front lines, Kyp Durron remained a highly respected member of the Jedi Council, whose wisdom and power helped to inspire entire generations of passionate prospective Padawans. In terms of accolades, Durron was counted amongst the greatest blades beings the NJO ever produced. Grandmaster Luke Skywalker crediting his saber skills as being equal to those of the renowned Jedi Battlemaster Kyle Katarn and the Sith Lord of the Lost Tribe Vion Gallion, and superior to those of fellow Council Master Silgal and Luke himself at Sinkhole Station during a low ebb in his physical and mental strength. The Darrian's capabilities were such that he was also one of 3 Jedi Masters considered to lead the strike team to capture or neutralize Darth Plagueis. The same Plagueis who, just weeks prior, had gone toe-to-toe with Luke and lived to tell about it. Shifting into direct feats, Kyp is very much analogous to Yoda in that, in terms of just the straight-up high-tier fights, the Jedi Master has only ever been depicted going against 2 opponents. However, this isn't really that big a deal since those 2 opponents just happen to be 2 of the premier martial artists of the entire era. In Yoda's case, this was besting Count Dooku and disarming Darth Sidious in fights to the death, and in Kyp's, it was subduing a young Jaina Solo while she was amped by the dark side, and fighting on equal terms with Grand Master Luke Skywalker during a high-intensity sparring match. While I won't argue the fact that sparring and actual fights to the death carry different connotations, we must not forget that the novel in which the Luke fight takes place, Legacy of the Force Fury, states outright that the session was considered to be horribly dangerous to anyone who wasn't Council level. Durron has also made his mark outside the Jedi Order, having slain numerous Imperials, Yuuzhan Vong warriors, and Lost Tribe Sith members during their respective invasions. Moving into technique, Kyp Durron's attributes were most heavily fleshed out in the novel I, Jedi, the NJO book series, the NJO sourcebook, and the Dark Side sourcebook. As noted by each source, Durron was a very well-rounded martial artist, boasting training in the Jedi standards of lightsaber combat and force abilities, as well as numerous alternative disciplines like marksmanship, unarmed combat, and piloting, the latter of which being a skill he was particularly famed for. Upon his initial admittance to the Order, Luke and Cam Solasar instructed Kyp in the 3 rings of defense, which remained his primary martial arts discipline from then on after. Essentially a hybrid of the strong, medium, and fast styles I covered in my Savage Opress vs. Jaden Core matchup, the 3 Rings of Defense was a simplistic tutorial style designed to introduce the students of Luke's Academy to the principles of lightsaber combat. The main difference, obviously, being that it functioned as a multi-layered singular style rather than 3 separate ones. As described by Corin Horn, the form consisted of 3 sets of unique stances and maneuvers that dealt with dueling at various ranges. The outer ring consisting of grand sweeping power attacks, the middle ring rapid short strikes used to intercept projectiles, and the inner ring tight conservative blocks used to shunt aside and riposte against an enemy's attacks. Armed with a standard single-bladed lightsaber with a purple-hued blade, Durron's offensive technique could best be described as a tempered storm, using pin-accurate power blows to either shunt aside an opponent's weapon or exploit weak points in their defenses, then quickly executing them with either a whipping slash or a bisecting cleave. The Jedi Master heavily reinforced these sequences with integrated force abilities, having a particular fondness for telekinesis and lightning. Shifting over to defense, Kyp Durron's personal style took full advantage of middle and inner ring logistics. When engaging other duelists, he relied on tight, conservative parries to shunt aside incoming strikes, and a precise shifting of weight and stance enabled the facilitation of deft evasions. During his duel with Luke Skywalker, during which time the Grand Master was specifically described as unleashing a series of quick probing attacks, Kyp adopted something of a blend between his usual tactics by deflecting the assault close to his body with equal speed and minimal movement. Let me repeat that. Durron deflected a probing assault from Grand Master Luke Skywalker through a judicious combination of equal speed and less movement. Damn. Though arrogant and hot-headed in his youth, Kyp Durron grew to become a highly experienced, if somewhat aggressive, tactical fighter, distinguished amongst his peers for his craftiness and determination. Like many counselors of his caliber, he is capable of being dropped cold in high-intensity situations and making quick and effective decisions to best respond to them. Though rarely employed, the Jedi Master was highly skilled at goading opponents through the use of body language. The best example being when he stoked the rage of a powerful Yuuzhan Vong warrior by rooting himself in place during their fight. Kyp could also be quite analytical when the situation called for it, often taking the measure of his opponents so as to adjust his tactics in order to respond accordingly. The first thing that must be understood about Lord Plagueis is that he was not a dedicated martial artist. That was not the area for which he channeled the majority of his energies. Like most Sith of the latter Bainite line, he was forced by circumstance to build a more expansive skill set and familiarize himself with a wider variety of weapons and ethereal powers, becoming a general-purpose operator rather than a committed blades being. He was in his element with force power and political subterfuge, not dueling. Despite this, Darth Tenebris still proclaimed Plagueis to be a master of lightsaber combat, which was rather ironic given the Mune's expressed disdain for the art. While Tenebris is noted to be an avid combat enthusiast, meaning his grading would carry a great deal of weight in principle, this is unfortunately a vague designation since, unlike Luke Skywalker, Tenebris has no dueling feats to draw on to give us any reason to take his word seriously. Moving into feats, Darth Plagueis, surprisingly, has even less lightsaber showings to draw on than Kyp Durron, though it is a singularly impressive display nonetheless. During a skirmish in the forests of Sojourn, Plagueis fought and defeated Darth Venemus, the secret second apprentice of Tenebris, who desired to challenge him for the Sith title. While it is true that the Dark Lord's victory in this contest came about primarily through tactics and force power rather than skill with the blade, Plagueis still acquitted himself extremely well, matching the apprentice's assault almost entirely blow for blow, despite his intimate knowledge of his style. Moving away from forceful beings, Plagueis has easily slaughtered a crew of space traders, thrashed a small army of primitives during a training mission, and single-handedly fought off a squad of Maladian assassins during the gathering of the Canted Circle. That last feat is particularly notable since not only have Maladians been noted to be capable of wounding or killing Jedi, but the fact that Plagueis was unarmed and bleeding half to death at the time. Moving into technique, Darth Plagueis' attributes were most heavily fleshed out in the aptly titled Darth Plagueis novel and the short story The Tenebris Way. While both works provide comprehensive insights into the character of Plagueis, both also fail to directly establish his primary martial arts discipline or disciplines. However, based on what he has demonstrated, I believe the Dark Lord's most likely combat disciplines can be inferred. Darth Plagueis was the teacher of Darth Sidious, and Sidious has been noted to be a master of all 7 classical forms of lightsaber combat. While it is true that Sidious has been noted to do most of his adult life training on his own, Plagueis would have needed at least a modest understanding of the 7 forms to get the ball rolling. Furthermore, he was easily able to recognize the elements of Nyman and Teräs Käse in Darth Maul's fighting style as he trained. Add this to the fact that Plagueis, as mentioned, held a notable disdain for lightsaber combat, frequently chained force attacks into his saber sequences, and has been occasionally depicted wielding 2 blades, leads me to believe that his primary martial arts discipline was Nyman, the 6th form of classical lightsaber combat. Also known as the Way of the Rancor, Nyman was a well-rounded and balanced fighting style that, on a practical level, possessed no major strengths or weaknesses. Combining elements of the previous 5 forms, the style was specifically designed to accommodate Jedi who put less emphasis on their martial arts training, leaving them free to divert their attentions to alternative studies. Sound familiar? Form 6 also stressed the integration of force abilities and dual-blade fencing into one's technique, which were, again, tactics that Plagueis proved to be adept at, having seamlessly worked in telekinetic strikes during his duel with Venemus, and wielding his master's blade alongside his own shortly after killing him. Armed with a long-handled, single-bladed lightsaber with a red-hued blade, Plagueis' offensive technique was simple but effective, relying on a judicious mixture of whipping slashes and hacking cleaves to either disarm or eviscerate his adversaries. This technique was further enhanced by his munoid physiology, often working his physical form in a manner similar to a marionette to bewilder foes even further. While the Dark Lord has never been shown integrating physical strikes into his saber sequence in an actual lightsaber duel, his masterful demonstration against the Maladians clearly shows that such things would be child's play. Moving into defense, Plagueis had no trouble deflecting blaster fire from skilled marksmen, and while his technique for saber-to-saber dueling was, again, very simple, it was by no means ineffective, frequently switching between static blocks and shifting parries to bat aside a foe's blade and set them up for a counteroffensive. Just as with his offense, Plagueis leveraged his physique to its fullest when defending, using full-body maneuvers to enhance his saber's positioning or outright evading attacks altogether. That being said, the style wasn't without its limits, as Venomius was able to penetrate Plagueis' defenses and score hits when he really put the pressure on. Tactically speaking, Darth Plagueis was without question one of the most intelligent villains in the Star Wars universe, though the bulk of this extensive knowledge base was centered around politics and force abilities rather than fighting. As far as his tactics in live combat were concerned, Plagueis was practically the definition of a rote response fighter. Rather than tailoring his singular skill set to fit all situations, he instead developed a very broad skill set with each of his techniques being specifically tailored to address a specific tactic. Draw a lightsaber, he draws his. Jump on a branch, he severs it with a force blow. Slash his throat, he blasts you to chunks. Action, reaction, action, reaction, action, reaction. While this strategy clearly had its benefits, it also meant that the Dark Lord relied heavily on his opponents to give him direction. And given that his entire approach to combat was based around literally doing everything at once, it also meant that he did nothing to its absolute apex, lightsaber combat being just one of many skills in his vast arsenal. While neither Kyp Durron nor Darth Plagueis possessed a substantial quantity of lightsaber dueling feats, the ones they do have speak towards an immense level of skill and range, having gone toe-to-toe with high-caliber adversaries and showing off a plethora of techniques while doing so. However, you place them side by side, and this actually becomes a fairly easy verdict to call. Darth Venomius is not weak. In fact, I would even argue a case for him being low council tier given his ability to nearly beat Plagueis in a duel despite the massive experience gap between them. But even so, I also think it's a bit of a stretch to argue that the Bith is any more of a threat than the dark side Jaina Solo Kyp easily subdued, and don't even try and at me on Venomius being an equal threat to Grand Master Luke Skywalker. That's so ignorant as to not even be worth discussing. Even if we were to widen the feat analysis to include non-forceful individuals, this dynamic wouldn't change. Stormtroopers are bigger threats than smugglers, and Yuuzhan Vong Slayers are bigger threats than Maladians. It really is just that simple. Even if we were to widen the feat analysis even more, stretch it to the brink by throwing in that James Luceno quote where he believes that Plagueis could maybe have defeated TPM Darth Sidious in a fight had he not been asleep, this still wouldn't change anything since Phantom Menace Sidious is below Revenge of the Sith Sidious, who's below Dark Empire Sidious, whom Dark Empire Luke was able to beat with minor assistance, the same Dark Empire Luke who's below Grand Master Luke, whom Kyp Durron was able to duel on par with in a high-intensity sparring match. We done? Good. This difference of depth in their opponent's skill levels carries over to their martial techniques. Plagueis' probable Nyman, Force Exotic Weapons hybrid provides him a great deal of versatility, yes. However, it only does this so long as he has the right tools at his disposal. Whereas the Three Rings of Defense on its own provides Kyp with a layered technique that allows him to adapt to virtually any combat situation no matter what. As far as their respective intelligence and tactical sensibilities go, the two actually create a rather interesting contrast. In terms of just raw intelligence, Darth Plagueis definitely holds an edge. Not that Kyp is dumb or anything, quite the opposite. He's very intelligent, more than worthy of a Jedi Council Master. It's just that he never quite pushed himself to learn everything there was to know about the nature of the universe in the same way the Dark Lord did. And that's without even taking into account the inherent differences between human and Mun brain structure. Luckily for him, though, Plagueis' intelligence is completely focused on the wrong direction. As I said previously, Darth Plagueis is much more of a scientist and a magician rather than a warrior, and his tactics in battle reflect this mentality. When operating at a lab, he's subtle and methodical, but when operating in a lightsaber duel, he's almost painfully straightforward, simply leaning on his deep knowledge base to pull out whatever counter that best addresses the situation. While not an unintelligent strategy in and of itself, the unspoken drawback on relying on your opponents to give you direction means that if you're ever confronted by a technique that you are completely unfamiliar with, you'll have nothing to fall back on. You can have Chuck Norris's entire repertoire memorized to a T, but that's not gonna do much if Bruce Lee steps into your ring. Keeping with that example, Plagueis most likely has knowledge of the 7 traditional Jedi forms, as well as numerous other weapon styles like blasters and vibroblades, but he has no knowledge of the 3 rings of defense. In fact, they weren't even invented in his lifetime. Meaning that Kyp is not only attacking the Dark Lord in unfamiliar ways, but he also doesn't have to worry about Plagueis devising any sort of debilitating counters to his offensives, and would then only have to contend with his base skill levels, which, if feats are anything to go by, is nothing the Jedi Master can't handle. I award Kyp Durron the edge as a martial artist and combat strategist. The second oldest son of 2 non-forceful parents, Kyp Durron was one of the most powerful Jedi Masters in the Order's history, boasting a nearly unparalleled connection to the various alignments of the Force. As far as his actual standing in relation to his peers went, Kyp considered himself to be more powerful than Grand Master Luke Skywalker, the son of the Chosen One and conqueror of Darth Sidious. While Luke himself has never directly weighed in on his friend's claim of supremacy, he has readily acknowledged Durron as one of his greatest students, praising his strength time and again, and on one occasion even referring to him as being, and I quote, frightfully powerful. Even the members of Luke's order weren't above praising Durron's connection. Both Jason and Jaina Solo considered Kyp to be an extraordinarily powerful individual, Jaina even being somewhat jealous of him, and Jedi Knight Worth Skyder estimated that his strength was on an equal plane to Master Skywalker's own. So, yeah, no matter how you slice it, Kyp Durron is, at the very least, on par with Grandmaster Luke in terms of raw Force power. Damn. As mentioned previously, Durron's prowess with physical augmentation was prodigious, having used basic Karato Salva techniques to re-energize his body, and traded blows with Yuuzhan Vong's slayers without too much strain. Though not a dedicated Jedi healer, his role-playing guide character sheet does credit him with the ability to mend himself through the Force, and he has even utilized the healing trance technique to accelerate his recovery after forcibly crushing himself inside a metal cylinder. Moving into the realm of energy-based powers, Kyp Durron possessed a strong affinity with Force lightning, and it served as one of his primary offensive abilities. Though at times unstable in both composition and color depending on his mental state, Durron's lightning strikes were just as deadly as those summoned by the Lords of the Sith. And he has even showcased the rare talent to overwhelm master-level applications of Tuta Minis with his bursts. Though I would be remiss if I didn't mention the fact that he has only done so when his powers were enhanced by the Force Ghost of Exar Kun. Speaking of Tuta Minis, Kyp possessed a high level of skill with this defensive power as well. His character sheet crediting him with the ability to dispel blaster bolts, and the novel New Jedi Order Dark Journey crediting him with the ability to dispel Force lightning. Though not counted amongst the great telepaths of his era, Kyp's skills in this area were nonetheless formidable. He has used mental persuasion to compel large groups of sentients to calm down, force concealment to hide his signature from other adepts, and force bonds to allow for the communication of feelings, thoughts, and images across vast distances. On a more personal level, Durron could utilize the inwardly directed battle mind ability to boost his morale and fighting spirit, as well as the insidious drain knowledge, which, as the name implies, allowed the user to forcibly steal deep memories and information from a target that was often violent and psychologically damaging to the recipient. He also boasted a facility with Farsight, though the exact nature and range of his abilities are unknown. As far as more esoteric abilities were concerned, Kyp was one of only a handful of characters in the entire franchise who could utilize both the Aura of Uneasiness and Alter Environment. Also known as the Shadow of Uneasiness, the Aura of Uneasiness was a dark side power that enabled the caster to project an invisible shroud of energy that caused individuals within its radius to suffer from a sensation of intense malaise, clouding their senses and making it extraordinarily difficult to concentrate in battle. Alter Environment was a neutrally aligned power that allowed the user to manipulate various aspects of nature. In Durron's case, the ability to literally call down lightning bolts powerful enough to kill a young Leviathan in one shot. Last and certainly not least, we have Kyp Durron's specialty and most impressive branch of power, telekinesis. In terms of offense, his most basic force pushes were powerful enough to incinerate multiple rats, hurl massive boulders, and even push back concussive missiles mid-flight. At multiple points during the Yuuzhan Vong War, the Jedi Master also demonstrated the ability to unleash directed force waves with enough kinetic energy behind them to move, crumple, or outright destroy large starships. Feats made all the more impressive by the fact that Durron accomplished them instantly and without any notable toll on his reserves. In more personable combat, he's used subtle nudges to disarm opponents, as well as force throws to strike targets at a distance. Luke having compared his speed and finesse in doing so as being equivalent to that of a Yuuzhan Vong thug-bug assault. Kyp has also proven that he can reliably penetrate the telekinetic defenses of Council-level adepts, blasting away an unprepared Luke when he was a teenager, and ragdolling Lobaka, Jaina Solo, and Corran Horn as an adult. Kyp reinforced his offensive output with strong telekinetic defenses. While it is true that his defenses were penetrated by fellow Council Master Kenneth Hamner during a scuffle in the novel Darkness II: The Unseen Queen, I see this as more an example of Hamner's own considerable power rather than any perceived defensive weaknesses on Durron's part. Not to mention, the scene can be read as though Durron didn't have his guard up since he was currently engaged with Corran Horn, who couldn't match his TK if he tried. Finally, we have what I'm sure a lot of you have been waiting for. The big telekinetic feat that not only cements Master Durron as one of the most powerful Jedi of his era, but stands in direct comparison to that of Grand Master Luke Skywalker. During the mid-stage of the Yuuzhan Vong War, Kyp Durron channeled as much telekinetic power as he could in the time allotted and successfully stopped and moved a black hole that had been created by a Dovin Basel. Though not directly confirmed, the novel strongly implies that this feat was easier for Kyp to accomplish than Luke, since he was less fatigued after the fact. Well now, that's pretty impressive. Moving a black hole. I mean, it was artificial, but it was still a black hole. And, a black hole the size of a nickel has more mass than the Earth. And this one was at bare minimum the size of a starship, so yeah. Top 10 force feats in the verse. Cool. Quite literally a born and bred Sith Lord, Darth Plagueis was one of the most powerful Dark Lords to ever live, his connection to the dark side of the Force becoming legendary in his time. Addressing his direct power standing, Plagueis was noted by Darth Sidious and various other sources to be more powerful than him for the majority of their partnership, only being on equal footing during the time frame of Phantom Menace. While these are, admittedly, a vague set of designations given the circumstances behind their fight, they, along with James Luceno's statement that Plagueis could have potentially, not decisively, but potentially, beaten Sidious had they fought for real, should comfortably place him on at least equal standing with TPM Darth Sidious in terms of raw force power. Which is pretty freaking insane considering Sidious 13 years later was noted as the most powerful Sith Lord in history. As has already been covered, Darth Plagueis' prowess with physical augmentation when paired off with his munoid physiology made him a devastatingly powerful combatant, being able to casually outrun a rainstorm and drive his fists through armored torsos. He could also augment his vocal abilities to employ the dreaded Force Scream technique, using his very shouts as a sonic weapon capable of rupturing the eardrums of several Maladians. For utility and defense, he employed various Sith techniques to regulate his bodily functions, improving his ability to cope with severe injuries. Shifting over to energy-based powers, Darth Plagueis possessed a prodigious aptitude with Force lightning, having shorted out heavy machinery, started fires, and has even covertly killed a target by casting it via physical contact. Though he has never been shown doing so, it is heavily implied that he is capable of flash-frying targets as well. For defense, he developed skill in Tutaminis, notably using it to absorb a barrage of blaster fire and channel the energy into a burst of Force lightning. Though he, again, has never been shown doing so, I am of the opinion that Darth Plagueis is capable of dispelling Force lightning with Tutaminis as well. My reasoning for this line of thought is based on the fact that lesser Dark Lords of his era, such as Maul and Dooku, possessed limited to full range with this ability, so power isn't an issue. And since Plagueis very specifically trained Sidious in the art of energy manipulation, the same Sidious who taught the aforementioned Maul and Dooku how to repel lightning, it's not unreasonable to assume he can do so as well. As one of the powers he started developing as a child, telepathy was a branch in which Plagueis possessed particular skill. He has made use of mind tricks to manipulate the weak-willed, Force concealment to hide his dark side signature from Jedi, farsight to catch glimpses of the future, and most impressively of all, projecting Force illusions convincing enough to fool a young Palpatine. In the realm of the arcane, Darth Plagueis achieved legendary status as a Force wielder specifically for his extensive research on the Midi-Chlorians, with the ultimate goal of altering his relationship to the Force and achieving immortality. The knowledge he amassed vastly increased his strength in the Force, to the point where virtually no one but Sidious could compete with him, and fed into many of his abilities. Internally, Plagueis has used the power to rejuvenate his body and recover from all the injuries he sustained during the Maladian attack, save the ones tied to the transpirator. Offensively, he has used it to compel the Midi-Chlorians in a target to return to their source, essentially willing a subject to die. However, given that Plagueis has only ever killed the non-forceful King Varuna in this manner, a feat that in itself was implied to be time-consuming and labor-intensive, its use in a heated battle with another powerful Force-sensitive is a bit unquantifiable. Finally, we have Darth Plagueis' telekinetic abilities, and just as with Kyp Durron, his skills in this area were simply extraordinary. In terms of offense, his basic Force pushes were powerful enough to hurl several enormous slabs of rock, and precise enough to guide microscopic nanosyringes. During the skirmish at the Fobosi Lodge, he unleashed directed Force waves with enough telekinetic energy behind them to atomize the bodies of at least a dozen armored Maladians, a feat that was made all the more impressive by the fact that Plagueis accomplished it instantly and was heavily injured at the time. In more personable combat, he's used directed saber throws to strike targets at a distance, and Force chokes for painful kills. For defense, he has put up telekinetic walls to deflect projectiles and even close-quarters physical strikes. There is no concrete information on the strength of Plagueis' passive telekinetic barrier, nor on his ability to penetrate such defenses. Though given his power level, I think it goes without saying that both fall well within the High Council to Grandmaster range. It's all tied up, and since Force abilities will be the deciding factor in this matchup, I will be proceeding directly into the final verdict. Now, I know for a fact that I'm gonna be getting some heat for saying this, but, well, purely in terms of raw Force power, you can honestly make the argument that Kyp Durron is more powerful than Darth Plagueis.
Let me explain.
Like I've said at multiple points in this video, Lord Plagueis is ridiculously powerful. His connection to the dark side easily falling within the top 20 Sith Lords in galactic history. But in a contest with Master Durron, the scaling simply doesn't fall in his favor. Darth Plagueis was, at most, a direct equal to Phantom Menace Darth Sidious, who himself is less powerful than Revenge of the Sith Darth Sidious, who's less powerful than Return of the Jedi Darth Sidious, who's less powerful than Dark Empire Darth Sidious. Meanwhile, Kyp Durron was at least on par with Grand Master Luke Skywalker, who is more powerful than Dark Empire Luke Skywalker, who himself, with only minor assistance from Leia, was able to defeat Dark Empire Darth Sidious. And even if you want to pull out the superior lightsaber duelist overcomes a stronger Force wielder argument, it still doesn't matter because Dark Empire Luke was still able to successfully Force strike Dark Empire Sidious, and is still weaker than the Luke Kyp is directly compared to. I know that was a bit of a mouthful, so here's a direct description of what I mean. Yikes. Now, just so we are clear, I'm not saying that Darth Plagueis is light years behind Kyp Durron in power. In fact, it's not even close to being that severe. I'm just saying that when the scaling is analyzed empirically, Durron clearly has a distinct power advantage. Not an overwhelming one, but a distinct one. Still though, power isn't everything. And when you strip away all the muscle flexes and strength scaling, the main difference between these two comes down to how they configured their skill sets. Darth Plagueis is a grand-scale Force wielder focused on the ethereal, whereas Kyp Durron is a multi-scale Force user focused on battle. While I wouldn't necessarily say that either pathway is inherently superior to the other in a philosophical sense, it's pretty clear which one is the more viable in single combat. Darth Plagueis may be better at enhancing the subtle chemistry of his body than Kyp Durron, but in terms of physical augmentation applied to lightsaber combat, well, we've already concluded our verdicts there. As far as their respective skill with energy-based Force abilities goes, Plagueis likely possesses a stronger affinity for Force lightning owing to his dark side alignment, but comes up short due to logistics. Both are capable of utilizing Force lightning to an equal magnitude, and both are at the very least on par in regards to their respective usages of Tuta Menace. But Plagueis' Transpirator mask saddles him with an extra vulnerability to electrical discharges that Kyp simply doesn't possess. Moving into their respective aptitude with telepathy, Plagueis definitely possesses a greater natural ability than Durron, but lacks the combative focus. While I obviously don't think either fighter could successfully mind trick the other, given how they are both Force wielders trained to resist such influence, I do believe that Kyp's battle mind would allow him to see through Plagueis' illusions, since there is a precedence for inwardly directed battle meditation countering such tactics. A similar effect is at play with their arcane abilities. Plagueis' Midi-Chlorian manipulation is a much more impressive power on a theoretical grand scale, but in terms of speed and ease of use in live combat, Kyp's aura of uneasiness and alter environment blow it out of the water. In terms of their respective skills with telekinesis, Kyp Durron's combative talent over Plagueis shines all the brighter. Not only has the Jedi Master demonstrated greater finesse in comparable situations than the Dark Lord, he either matches or surpasses him in magnitude as well. Darth Plagueis can throw large stones, Kyp Durron can throw large stones. Plagueis can throw a saber, Kyp Durron can throw a missile. Plagueis can disintegrate a dozen Maladians, Kyp Durron can move a singularity. To reiterate my earlier point, Kyp Durron and Darth Plagueis are definitely in the same overall Grandmaster tier when it comes to raw force power. Durron's strength advantage being more akin to the difference between Yoda and Count Dooku than Yoda and Asajj Ventress. The most significant differences between them is how they oriented their skill sets. Kyp Durron is simply a more viable combative force wielder than Darth Plagueis, boasting more experience, greater power, and a wider arsenal of abilities, many of which being specifically tailored to counter what the Dark Lord is bringing to the table. For these reasons, I feel that the best analog for a fight between Kyp Durron and Darth Plagueis would be the duel between Darth Krayt and Darth Weirlock III in Issue 1 of the War Arc in the comic series Star Wars Legacy, with the initial fight being a spectacular and drawn-out contest of equals, only for Kyp's greater power and martial skill to slowly but inevitably wear down Plagueis' defenses and allow him to seize the initiative, cutting him down. I declare Jedi Master Kyp Durron the winner. Well guys, I hope you enjoyed this entry in Versus Series Season 7. As always, please leave your thoughts and questions in the comments section below. May the Force be with you, stay safe, and I'll see you guys later.